أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم اخرجنا من ظلمات الوهم وأكرمنا بنور الفهم اللهم افتح لنا أبواب رحمتك وانشر علينا من خزائن علومك يا أرحم الراحمين اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. My brothers and my sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Over the past 2 nights, we've been speaking about the roles of man, of women, and of families within the sacred worldview of Islam. I want to wrap up the discussion today and then mention a few words on Sayyidah Zahraa alayhi salam. Then we will have the Fatemiyah, and then we will have tonight a Q&A for anyone who wants to stay behind and have an interactive session. So I'll try not to take too long with the initial talk so that we can have more of an interactive session, because a lot of brothers and sisters were asking me questions and I wasn't able to respond. So inshallah, that's what we'll be spending tonight. I just wanted to update everyone on the program. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. As we all know, I hope, at the very least most of us know, when it comes to fiqh, when I say fiqh, that means Islamic law, or the rulings that we follow. Fiqh in Arabic, tafaqquh, means understanding. But when we say fiqh, we're talking about Islamic rulings that usually we receive from those people who have studied for several decades, who we call our maraja'. And if you don't want to follow a marja', then you can become a marja' if you want. If you don't have a spare 60 years, you can follow a marja'. Or you can make up your own rules, and that's between you and Allah. I don't think that's safe. That's when it comes to fiqh and Islamic law. Okay? When people use that term fiqh, that's what they mean. Now, unfortunately, many of us, when we are first taught about Islam growing up, we're taught about what's halal and haram only. That's necessary, but it's usually one of the only things we're taught. So, an experience that I often have when I speak to brothers and sisters in schools, and I ask them about Islam, it's obvious to me when they answer me that they look at Islam as a rule book of do's and don'ts, of what's haram and what's halal. Whereas that's a part of Islam, it's the shell. It's the outer shell. It's the sharia, as we call it. That's what sharia is. But that's where it's supposed to stay. That once you open the shell, there's supposed to be a pearl inside. And then that's your experience of this deen. Most people never open the shell. Most people maybe end up in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s still looking at Islam as only a rule book. The rules are necessary because you can't take the diamond without first opening the shell properly. You have to experience it. Sharia, tariqa, haqiqa, as they say. Right now, people want to go straight to haqiqa. Okay? They want, right now, if you look at what people are speaking about with their thirst for spirituality, even when it comes to the atheists and new atheists. So Sam Harris is one of the leading atheists of the time. He has a book called Waking Up and an app called Waking Up. And both are about meditation. Because he says that spirituality is a necessary part of the human experience. And just because I'm an atheist doesn't mean I don't have spirituality. But I don't need religion. That's what they say. The problem with that concept is it's often divorced from ethics. So I can be whichever way I want to be. There is no objective line, it's all relative, but at least I get to experience spirituality. So I have to ask, what do you mean by spirituality? And if you break it down, what they mean by spirituality is a bunch of vibes. It's vibes. It's just feeling good. It's feeling good about yourself. Yani, the whole idea of overcoming the ego, fighting against this, even when it comes to other religions, when we look at those people who practice Buddhism, or even those people who practice Christianity properly or Judaism properly, they also have a rule book. They also have a guideline of do's and don'ts. So there's a religion. And they combine it with spirituality. Right now, even that's becoming scarce because people want the spiritual without the hard work, without the outer shell. Our problem is we had so much outer shell growing up, we get tired of it, so then we welcome this idea of spirituality without the hard work. But it doesn't work. You have to combine the two. You have to struggle for true and real spirituality where your dogma is combined with the spiritual experience. And that's what it's supposed to be. We usually have one or the other. I just mentioned both ways. Either spiritual without religion or too much dogma without the spiritual. You need both. You need to fly and you need to be grounded at the same time. That's why when it comes to fiqh, you'd be surprised to know that al-fiqh that we know to be the rules is considered in Islam to be al-fiqh al-asghar. It's the smaller fiqh. So if you study theology, they call that the greater fiqh, al-fiqh al-akbar. So you have two different fiqh. So if fiqh al-asghar is the rule book, what is fiqh al-akbar? Fiqh al-akbar, the greater fiqh, the greater form of understanding and following the deen, you also have a way to be, but you cannot follow a marja' for this. You only follow a marja', you only follow a scholar when it comes to the smaller fiqh. When it comes to the rule book of what's halal, what's haram, what's wajib, what's mustahab, the things that we're supposed to do, the outer shell, right. But the greater fiqh, al-fiqh al-akbar, is your aqidah. It's your belief system. It's the way in which you see the world. And they call it aqidah because it comes from aqd, which means sometimes we use it as a contract, aqd between two people. It's aqd, a contract. When they get married or when they want to sell something or whatever, that also comes from aqd, meaning a knot of a rope. That's where it actually comes from, aqd of a rope, when it's tied. Because when I form a contract with you, now we're tied. And aqidah, my belief system, is supposed to be tied to me. I cannot divorce myself from it. I cannot divorce myself from ethics, from my worldview. Your aqidah is your worldview and you can't follow a marja' for that. So you can come and say, okay, what do I have to do for Allah to reward me or for me to perform my obligations? We say pray 5 times a day. That's one of your obligations. You fast during Shahr Ramadan, it's one of your obligations. A marja' can tell you how to pray. If I forget my third rak'ah, what do I do, and everything else. So we have someone that we can refer to. But when it comes to your belief system, you're not allowed to perform taqleed. That means you are on your own when it comes to your belief system. That means you have to find the real way, the objective path of how to see the world. Truly, objectively. We believe in reality, objective truth. So we don't agree that it's all relative and I apply meaning onto the external reality. We don't believe that. The external reality has meaning with or without me. And it's upon me to discover that. There's a real reality outside. And I mentioned this in the first few nights about epistemology, about what makes your form of knowledge have authority over mine, over someone else's. And we believe in Quran, we believe in Hadith, we believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is all now forming a belief system. So there's supposed to be, from my belief system, different actions that manifest because I see the world differently than someone else who doesn't have the same belief system. And that's why I asked, what makes me a Muslim in regards to someone else who isn't a Muslim? And if it's only al-fiqh al-asghar, then how serious of a Muslim am I? Muslim, someone who has submitted to the will of Allah. Because then the only difference between us is that I follow fiqh al-asghar and he doesn't. But fiqh al-akbar, we have the same belief system. It's scary because it means I don't really believe in the message. And then of course I'm going to have trouble with my prayers and fasting and things aren't going to make sense to me. Because those things only make sense once you have al-fiqh al-akbar down. We learnt it in the opposite way. We learned what we have to do and what we don't have to do, but we never learned why. well then at one point when you ask why and you have no answer, you're going to disregard what you're doing. You're not going to have the same willpower. You know when they always ask right now, what's your why? What's your why? And that's why we say taqwa is so important, God consciousness, because we're supposed to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala everywhere. That's what we're supposed to see. If I believe that Allah is seeing me, I will act differently than if I don't believe He is seeing me, if He is watching me. Notice, أول الدين معرفة الله. The beginning of religion is to know God, to know Allah. Aqidah, belief system. It's your worldview. It's your why. From there, we know why we have obligations, and then I know how I have to be as a human being, and then as a man, and as a woman, as a family, as a community. But it begins with Ma'rifatullah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So if the beginning is to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where do I begin from? We say, Man arafa nafsah, faqad arafa rabbah. So you must begin from yourself. You start from you. But how much of yourself do you know? Most people don't actually experience inner dialogue. An actual dialogue between themselves and themselves. It's a great gift of our tradition that we're constantly told to contemplate. That contemplation is greater than 70 years of worship. That means worshipping and ibadah is a form in our religion that we're supposed to gravitate towards, but there's something like on Laylatul Qadr, when people are constantly in a state of dua and they're trying to recite as many prayers as they can before sunrise, it would do a lot of good for that person to actually take a corner for themselves, sit down and think and contemplate. But a lot of us don't know how to think. And we associate our automatic thoughts with who we are, as if we're on autopilot. So there's no real inner dialogue going on. So there's no growth going on. These sessions that we have here are supposed to be a spark, a few nights, every few months or every year, that allow us to have that inner dialogue where we really question ourselves. Because when I see you guys, and I mentioned this yesterday, I really remember myself 12, 13 years ago sitting in this very building and listening to these lectures and how they would make me think and speak to my friends and make decisions that altered my life forever. And a lot of people that I would attend with, I would say that many of them are not on the path. Alhamdulillah, many of them are. Right now there are several brothers here that I used to attend with. So several are and several aren't. What happened? What was the difference? The worldview. For some, this was an interesting experience when we come here and we see this community. And for others, it altered their lives. The worldview is the beginning of it. And we're supposed to see Allah everywhere. When Abu Abdullah alayhi salam was asked by a man, I want to sin. He told him, I can't take it anymore. I'm addicted to a certain sin and I'm trying to stop. So this person is following al-fiqh al-asghar, that he doesn't want to do what's haram. But he's finding it so hard. He's so tempted. But he wants to be a good person. So he's saying, Imam al-Hussein, help me. I can't stop myself from sinning. What does the Imam say to him? And you notice how the answer is based on the worldview of the person. His answer isn't, no, you're not allowed. And if you do this, this is haram. That's not what he says. He starts to make him contemplate and think, to have an inner dialogue, so that he can affect his worldview and strengthen his purpose and reason. So he says to him, okay, sin. Go sin. Just sin in a place that Allah can't see you. So the man looks at him and says, but Allah can see everything. So he says, you know Allah can see you, and you still want to sin and transgress against what He told you not to do? So the man said, okay, is there another way? Give me another way. He said, sin. But go and sin in a land that does not belong to Allah. He said, but all lands belong to Allah. He said, all lands belong to Allah. You want to be in His land and you want to sin whilst He's seeing you. And you're okay with that? He's asking him questions to penetrate his worldview. He says, give me another way. He says, sin, but don't take from Allah's rizq. He says, all the rizq is from Allah. You want to take from His rizq and sin in His land and He's watching you? Sin. But when the angel of death comes to take your soul, just refuse. He says, I can't refuse the angel of death. He says, you can't stand up to the angel of death. But you think you can stand up to Allah on the day of judgment? So what's he doing here? He's reminding him of Aqidah. Your Aqidah is, as Amir al-Mu'minin alayhi salam says, to know from where you came, min ain, where you are, fi ain, and where you're going, ila ain. Where we come from? How am I here? Where did I come from? These questions make people uncomfortable because then they have to have the inner dialogue. They don't want the inner dialogue. They want to just be on autopilot. Where did I come from? How am I here? There was a time, not only a time, there was a lot of time where I was not here. Billions of years, and then I'm here. How? Where did I come from? Where am I now? Fi ain. What is this place? What's the reality of it? Am I aligned with the reality? And where am I going? A time is going to come without me. Do I die? Is this just a vehicle? Is this me? Is there a soul to this? Is there a world afterwards? This is your worldview. My brothers, if we can just stand up, brothers and sisters, stand up so we can come forward because a lot of people are trying to come inside. Thank you so much. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. There's a lot of space on the left and right side, and you can sit on the stage as well if you want. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Sorry. Sorry, no, that's not. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The reason the concept of the worldview is so important to our discussion is because where do our worldviews begin? The first nurturing spot of the way in which we see the world is in our family. So when we are infants, the way we see our mother and the way we see our father will affect our worldview more than anything. They will affect our personalities and our temperaments. They'll affect the whole idea of how we see the world. Later on, our worldview become altered with the relationships which we inherit and which we form in school and everything else. Those affect us a lot too. But the temperaments before all of that is within the family. That's why we've been saying, right now, a lot of what you've experienced right now is the sum of your relationships, of what you experienced from your mom and dad, of what you read, what you watched. Right now, you are who you are. And hopefully you have inner dialogue so you can grow, so you don't stay in the same place. And we've been speaking about how I, who I am now, a sum of my experiences, can become better, a better person objectively in alignment with the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt, so that I, as a man or as a woman, can now dictate the new values of my family, especially if I didn't like the values of the family I inherited. Inshallah, we all have love for our mothers and fathers and siblings, I hope. But a lot of the time, there are a lot of problems in these families. And it's very common. And there might be values that mean a lot to you that you inherited. And there might be a lot that you really don't like. The special part about forming your new family is now you're in the driver's seat. And you realize it's not that easy. And then here, we really see how important those values are to you, if you're even aware of them. That's the importance of the inner dialogue. That you have to be intentional about how you bring in these values into your family. Because what is a society and what is a community except that it is a sum of families? It is a group of families. If we are individuals and then we are trying to find our right partner, as we mentioned, we have to try, we're duty bound to look for a partner through a sacred worldview. Okay? To have an intention and niyyah, it's for Allah that I find this good husband or this good wife in order to bring good children into this world that can follow the Imam properly, aligned with Quran and Ahlul Bayt. This is all based on a worldview. If you don't see it that way, you're going to look at it through something else. That's why when men go to look for a woman or women look for a man, they don't know what to look for because they don't know about their worldview. There's no inner dialogue about it. What do I look for? Well, what are your values? What's your worldview? Is it aligned with Islam properly? Because a lot of the time, a brother just wants to find a girl who's beautiful. She has a nice face. That's where his worldview brought him. That the number one value is beauty. And so if I'm looking for someone to be with, she's got to be beautiful. And that worldview will affect the rest of his life. Will affect his relationship, his children, and everything else. And beauty is an important value when you're looking for something in your spouse. But there's a hierarchy of values. So our epistemology is that we receive our advice from the Ahlul Bayt, from the Quran. So we know exactly what it is that we want to bring into these new families. So this family now is the first place where my worldview is affected. It's the first place where I interact with religion. I'm saying this not only so you can remember what you went through, but so you can be intentional about what your children will go through with you. Because whatever you show them will be their first experience of everything, of every value, and of their worldview. And so their worldview will be formed in the way that you show them religion, especially in a symbolic way as well. So just like on the first night when we spoke about the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how we have to look for those names in everything around us because everything comes from one source, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a manifestation of His names. The world is full of mirrors and you yourself are a mirror and you want to polish that mirror to be the cleanest it possibly can so you can mirror the divine attributes in the best possible way and circumstance. That's what this is symbolically. Likewise, the child mirrors everything that they see or know about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through their parents too. So, a lot of people in their adulthood have issues with Allah. They have problems with God. They don't get along with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or they think that Allah doesn't like them. Or Allah doesn't forgive them when they ask for forgiveness. So they walk around with a lot of guilt on their shoulders, a huge burden. And when you get to the bottom of the issue, so there's one brother that was telling me his issue, how he's a good boy. He's in his late 20s and he's always helping people. He's very charitable. He gives back. He's very good to his parents. But he tells me that he feels like Allah just does not like him. No matter what he does, he is never in favor with God. How do you know what Allah likes in you, isn't liking you? How do you know he doesn't like you? He's like, I just feel all the time how guilty I am. I feel ashamed to pray. Sometimes I don't want to pray because I feel ashamed. Allah doesn't want that. For sure He doesn't want that. He said He doesn't want that. The Ahlul Bayt told us He doesn't want that. So this person has a worldview that's not from Islam, but he has projected it onto Islam. He's dressed it up in a way that Allah doesn't like me. So wait, what is the real purpose that you always walk around with a burden on your shoulders? And as we began to speak more and more, we realized he's got a deep issue with his father, who since he was a child, his father was always very disrespectful to him, mean to him, calling him names. So what happens is, and he's very good to his father till now, What happens is he grows up with the notion that he's not good enough, that his father doesn't like him, that he's never going to like him no matter what it is that he does. But he projects it onto God. He doesn't realize that it comes from his father. Why? Because when you're young, when you're an infant, when you're a child, you don't know too much about God. All you know about God is an image of God. When they ask you about heaven, you think it's a bunch of chocolates or it's a swimming pool or whatever else it is that you think is amazing when you're a child. But when you're a child, you interact with the names of Allah through your parents. So, as a child, when you really feel like you want safety, you go into the arms of your father because he is your protector. He's strong, the protector, the strong, Al-Qawi. So those are names of God. Your father provides for you. He brings you toys, and he brings you food, and he brings you clothes. You see that. So you know, when you see a toy, when you see an advertisement, you know they know how to target the children because they know the children go to the parents and say, I want that. Well, that's what we ask now as adults. We ask Allah in dua. We want 1, 2, 3. But when you're a child, you ask your mom and dad. Your dad provides for you. Your mother is kind to you. She stays up with you when you're sick. She nurtures you. She is Rahman, Rahim, Wadud, Kareem, Ra'uf. All those names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you experience them through your mother and father. So what happens when your mother and father don't fulfill their roles properly? That means God didn't fulfill his role properly. That means as a child you see God betrayed you because those names, they didn't fulfill what they were supposed to do. Remember when you were a child how strong you thought your father was? I used to think my dad was the strongest in the world when I was a child. I used to have, just when I would watch WCW, I was a WCW kid, and I'd see Goldberg or Hulk Hogan, these guys, great big muscles, and they'd give me a few doubts, but no, my dad's stronger. And I grew up and I realized he's not. But when I was a child, you couldn't convince me. My dad's the strongest guy in the world. Why? Because I see God's names in him as a child. So what happens when you're let down? When you're let down as a child, you think God let you down. And then you graduate from your home, you realize your dad's not the strongest in the world. But what happens is you graduated with the wrong understanding of the names of God. So now when you interact with those names on Allah, you have a trust issue. What happens when now you yourself do that with your child? Your child's worldview will come from you right in the beginning. And the personality, the cradle of that personality will be the family. It's so important that you fix yourself before you have a child, or to the best of your ability, because they're going to inherit so much. Not only inherit just from what you have, from interacting. They might inherit something you don't have. They might form something you don't have. A quality that you do not have because of certain interactions. You want to be intentional about everything they see and they hear in the family to come. Just before that, you have to think about what you want to find in your partner. This is a tough mission. This is the beginning of helping the community. You want to get back to your community, you start with yourself, you start with the partner, and what you want to bring forth for your child. And this happens over decades. Okay, you have to look at it as happening in decades. When you think community, don't think that it's, ordering some food for the majlis. And that's community. This is a really important brick in a really great wall in a massive building. And it takes decades for it to form. And right now, we've inherited something so far right now. It's been about 20, 30, maybe 40 years. Some of us are first generation, second generation. And the next generation, it's going to be interesting what happens there. Because the world's never been where it is right now. With all the modern advancements that we spoke about yesterday especially. We don't know where we're going. We don't know what's happening to our brains right now. Right now, if you think about a young boy or girl just 60, 70 years ago, 60 years ago, their experience of intimacy with the opposite gender maybe would have amounted to 1, 2, 3 people. If a guy was a player, then maybe he had seen 8, 9 women in his whole life. His whole life. And that is a big number. It was mainly 1, 2 people. Right now, on phones, people can see intimacy, fake intimacy, not real intimacy, in a vulgar way. You can see hundreds of people naked in the space of an hour. What happens to that brain? We don't know. No one knows what's going to happen to that brain. It's never happened before. It's like they're experiencing intimacy with another person, but there's no person there. And we don't know what happens to this generation. This is new to this generation. So we don't know where we're going. And the temptations that are around us right now, and the pathways are so easy to gain access into those problems. They're huge problems. We don't know what the results are going to be. The family is not only the first place in which you receive your worldview, it's also where you have your launch pad of your very identity. And this is where we wrap it up with your identity in the West. This is where you form your identity. Human beings want to belong to something, to a tribe, that's why we all in England support all these football teams and feel so close to them. And a lot of people around here, you'll find, that's why the religion of England is football. And they carry the flags and the shirts and they're so proud and they fight, jihad. Hooligans. They go to jihad against each other. Right? Because you're Tottenham and I'm Arsenal. So we hate each other. Why? Because that's what everyone told me to do. See, your worldview is based on Tottenham and Arsenal. Right. Now, it's no problem for us to support football teams. It's amazing. It's great. And it forms a part of your identity. But you need to really question, who are you? What is your identity? Sure, I'm a Liverpool supporter. But is that my whole identity? That's part of my identity. But there is a hierarchy of my values. And that's not up there with my faith. But for a lot of people, it's beyond faith, even if they don't say that. So identity is important. Your family is the beginning of that. The beginning of finding out who you are. So, who am I? Man arafa nafsah, faqad arafa rabbah. He who knows himself, knows his Lord. There's not even any inner dialogue going on. I will never know Allah. Like some inner dialogue going on. Okay, how do I know? Where do I begin? How do I begin to know about myself? That's why we need to check in on our values. So if I asked you, and this is what I really want to ask you right now, this is your homework. You ever got homework in a majlis before? There's some homework, man. Homework. When you go home, you get a paper and a pen. Don't be lazy. Get a paper and a pen. No notepad on your phone. Get a paper and a pen. Don't just think about it. Get a paper and a pen and be intentional and sit down and write down your list of values. Write down your values. What is important to you? So that you can actually, now you're forcing out the inner dialogue. So you can find out some more about yourself. Write down your values. Find out, see yourself on a piece of paper. Okay, what means the most to me? What means the most? And we're all different here. We have different values. Here's where you get to know yourself. Are your values aligned with what you want to be currently? What are your ideal values? What are those things that you should be going towards? So for example, for me, a really important value for me is respect. Respect is a huge value that I highly, highly revere. For me to respect people and for me to receive respect, it's important to me. So I really hate something called disrespect. I put that down. Honor, I put that down. Faith, put that down. Family, put that down. Am I living my life according to my values? If I'm not, that's why I'm so depressed. That's why I'm always anxious. That's why I feel like I'm wasting my time. That's why I'm lost. That's why, because I'm not living according to what I know I need to be. If I am, but they're mediocre, then should these really be my values? If my values are there, I need to start to define them. Okay, now that I know my values, let me put them in order as well, prioritize them. Then I see what's the most important to me. Let me define them. What do I need to do to attain this value? What do I need to do to attain this value? And what do I need to do to attain this value? And I start to work on myself through the attainment of my values to know myself. So I can know Allah. I will know what I want from life, and I will know what I want from another, from my partner. And I will know what I want from my family. And that's why it's really important for us to have mission statements. An individual mission statement, an objective for myself. And a mission statement for my family, my wife, my children. What is our family message? Do we not have one? And a mission statement for my community. That we have a message that we want to put forward. Now, a lot of the time, we're not on the level of forming a mission statement for the community. We're not on the level of forming a mission statement in my family. At the very least, let me begin with a mission statement for myself. Let me start with that. Let me sit down, write down my values, form my mission statement, define my values, write a plan as to how I can attain them. These aren't goals. Yeah, I'm not telling you to sit down and write down your goals. This isn't about finances. This isn't about ambitions. This is about you, your identity, who you are. This is about your life core values, what you want to be about. What's your message to the world? If you died, what was your legacy? What do you imagine? When you imagine yourself, I often like to imagine this scenario. Imagine myself as a very old man on my deathbed, about to die. I like to have a conversation with that guy to see what are your regrets. What do you wish you could have done differently? What should you have done? What did you do good? I'd like to put myself in a position where I'm looking at everything in the past tense. So that I'm alright, I'm here now, and in my 30s, let me make sure I can leave a legacy. Not so people can remember me. It's important to me to leave a legacy of what I was. So my life has a meaning to it, a difference that remained after me. Not that I just entered and left and it's as if as nothing happened. So I can show Allah, I did something. That's important. Legacy is important. So you can offer something. It's important. So if you want to assist your community, begin with your family, begin with yourself. أول الدين معرفة الله. The beginning of religion is to know Allah. وَمَنْ عَرَفَ نَفْسَهُ فَقَدْ عَرَفَ رَبَّهُ. And he who knows himself knows his Lord. On these nights, before I continue, if we can just one final time come forward, my brothers, my sisters, because there's a few more people that are trying to get in. So thank you for being patient. Sallallahu alaihi Muhammad wa Muhammad. There's a lot of space on the side. If we stand and come forward, we can. There's space on the stage as well for anyone who wants to come from the back. There's space. Sallallahu alaihi Muhammad wa Muhammad. MashaAllah. There's a lot of lovers of the Ahlul Bayt. The more of us in here, the merrier. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. On these nights, we remember Sayyida Fatimah Zahraa alayhi salam. She was the twinkle in the eye of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi. She was the beloved of Imam Ali alayhi salam. And her story and her personality and her whole event is mysterious. We have a lot of questions when it comes to the tragedy of Sayyidah Zahraa. But the first question you have to ask before everything else is, where is she buried? Because no one knows. And that's a problem. Why does no one know where the daughter of Rasulullah is buried? We know where the Prophet is buried. We know where his wives are buried. We know where the shuhada of Badr are buried. We know where the Shuhada of Uhud are buried. We know where everyone's buried. We don't know where she's buried, as a message for all of time, to remind of her oppression, of what was done to her and her family, what was taken from them, and so that it can never be whitewashed as everything else was whitewashed. But right now, even for a tragedy as clear as Karbala, so obvious, you have some that come and say it was a political dispute and it was unfortunate, and 1, 2, 3 different theories, disgraceful theories. They try to whitewash the sacrifice, but they can't whitewash Sayyidah Zahraa's sacrifice, because there's a reason why we don't know where she's buried. Because she didn't want anyone to know. Because she didn't want those people who harmed her to come and make it seem like everything was okay. People ask now, why do we still remember that this happened over 1,000 years ago? Khair. Ali should have been first, fine, but he was fourth and it was done. It's over. It's not over. It wasn't about a political dispute. It's not politics. This is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's decree that was not followed. And a sacrifice to show that decree was not followed is Sayyidah Zahraa alayhi salam. That when the Prophet passed away, and when Imam Ali alayhi salam was mourning him, and washing his body, and burying him, a group of people went to seek the power positions in Islam, the power vacuum that the Prophet left behind, even though it was known and well regarded that Imam Ali was chosen by Allah, not by the Prophet Muhammad, by Allah, appointed by Allah, announced by the Prophet again and again in his life, that he would lead the Muslims, for us to continue our message, our worldview, our reason of being, that he was supposed to guard it. These people wanted it for themselves, for their greed, for their envy, and for their anger. You have to contextualize the tragedy. People around Medina hated Imam Ali. Just before the Prophet passed away, 2 years before, the Quraysh became Muslim. About 2,000 Quraysh members became Muslim. Do you know who the Quraysh are? They're the ones that came to fight them in Badr, Uhud and Khandaq. They're the ones who killed Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib. They are the ones who constantly tried to assassinate the Prophet. They all became Muslim just to join. Why? Because of a sense of identity, like I mentioned. That was becoming the main tribe. So let's join the team. But did they really believe? A lot of them did not believe. And why did they hate Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam? Because there wasn't a house, there wasn't a household from all of the people of the Arabs that Imam Ali had not killed an individual from that house during the wars. They used to call him al-Maut al-Ahmar, the Red Death. Because in all the battles before, he was the one. But they were enemies at the time. So then when they were allowed to join the Muslims, you're part of us now. You eat with us now. We're on the same table now. But they still hated him because they wanted revenge. They were not going to let him fulfill his mission. People like to ask, but this is Imam Ali. How could Amir al-Mu'mineen allow for those to come and harm his beloved Zahra? It's Imam Ali. But he is one man. How do you want to imagine this happening? How do you imagine it happening? Do you imagine that there's 1,000 people and that he fights 1,000 by himself? He said, bring me 40 men. Only 5 came. 5! 5 men came. That's it. How does he fight with 5 men against a whole tribe? It's a tribe. Especially when he does not favor the tribe. He doesn't care if you're Qurayshi or not. He doesn't care if you're Arab. The people who took power, they care if you're Qurayshi. See, Qurayshi is the best. You're from Quraysh, you're the best. An Arab is better than Ajam. This person did me a favor, good, you get a position. Did me a favor, you get a position. There was nepotism. Imam Ali doesn't work that way. So he's not very favorable. So yeah, let's oust him. So when they came back to the masjid, they took the bay'ah from everyone. Imam Ali alayhi salam was in the masjid. He got up with Zubayr and with Miqdad, and then they went to the house which was right next door. They went to the house, his house. At the time, the first Khalifa and the one who was to be the second Khalifa, they didn't want this fitna to remain. They called it a fitna. They made the fitna, but they called it a fitna. They said, we can't have questions. We need the bay'ah from Ali. It has to come from him. Otherwise, people are going to keep asking questions. People are giving bay'ah. And we don't want them to see that Ali is not giving the bay'ah. He saw what they were doing and he ignored it and he went to his house. We don't want them to see that. We don't want momentum to gather around him. He might have some loyalists. We don't want to see that. He did have loyalists, but a lot of people were scared. They knew. Why? Just like I mentioned identity, in that time, your identity was in your tribe. And even though they called themselves Muslims, they looked at Quraysh as the main strength, the main identity. So we don't want to cross Quraysh. Whereas the Imam, he didn't care about tribes. So you look at, in terms of who was loyal to him, they were all weak in terms of their status in society. Because they were all either slaves or without a tribe. So you look at his companions, Salman was a slave. Ammar, Miqdad was a slave. Zubayr was a strong individual in the society, but he was on his own. Look at those around him, Abu Dhar, from a tribe far away, by himself. Al-Ghafari, there was no one from Bani Ghafar. They were weak in terms of society around them. If they had formed allegiance to Quraysh, then they would be people that were not to be reckoned with. But look, the ones around Ali alayhi salam, if they die, if someone kills them, no one is going to get revenge. There's no vengeance. There's nothing to fear because they play everything by the book. So they say, we have to go and take the bay'ah from Ali, even if it's by force. So then they gather themselves, dozens of men, go and stand outside the house. And they call out to those in the house to come out and give their bay'ah. And when one calls out and says, the daughter of Rasulullah is in the house, he calls out and says, we're in. So what? And this is mentioned in all the different denominations of Islam, in all of the books. The difference is, in our books, the story continues. In their books, it stops. But I have to ask, oh, it stopped, so they all went home then? Because it stopped. He says, so what? Assalamu alaikum. And he went home. No, he did not go home. He said, so what? Now, people ask, how? How could they stand outside the house? Imam Ali is allowing them? No, the Ali I know would go and fight them. It's Haydar, it's Amir al-Mu'mineen, it's Asadullah, of course. Contextualize. Think of the house. The house was connected to the masjid. Right? You remember the narration when the Prophet says, Siddul abwab illa baba? Right? He said, close all the doors that were connected. The houses were connected to the masjid. The Prophet said, close all the doors, but keep one door connected to the masjid. The door of Ali, Baba, Ha, Damir. Damir goes back to Ali, Bab Ali. The door of Ali, connected to the masjid. So the Imam could open the door and go into the masjid. Doesn't have to come outside. He used to open the door and go into the masjid and lead salat or whatever else, or go and see the Prophet and come back, close the door. The only one who could do that. But when the Prophet would want to come and visit them, would he go through Bab Ali? Would he go through the door of Ali? Would he just, even us right now, those of us who live with our parents or those of us who have 2 floors, there's always a door in between that, out of respect. And out of respect, a lot of the time, we don't just allow those doors to be opened. We like to go from the front door. The front door, if you're going to visit me, come through the front door. The Prophet used to do that too. The Prophet would leave the masjid, go around to the front door of the house and knock on Bab Fatimah. That was Fatima's door. That's the door that they entered from, outside. Bab Ali is from this side. Who was in the house? Ali's in the house, Salman's in the house, Zubay's in the house, Miqdad's in the house, Ammar's in the house. Where are they? Usually they would sit in the room. You know how we have different rooms in our houses? It wasn't like a different room. It was one big space. But they're not going to be sitting down with Sayyidah Zahra. Is she going to mix around with men? Is she sitting with the boys? She's not sitting with them. She's not going to sit with them. She's going to sit aside. So how are we going to do this? The men are going to sit over here. The women will sit over here. There was one woman. She sat on her own. On her side of the house. And Ali on his side of the house. If someone comes to the door and opens the door, and it takes literally, it's an issue of a few seconds. A few seconds. They say, so what? And they barge through the door. And Sayyidah Zahra is on that side of the house. And here people, they have different disputes about what exactly occurred once they entered the house. But there is no dispute that they entered the house. There is no dispute. It's unanimous they entered the house. That's the real tragedy. Do you sit down and say, in Karbala, Imam Hussain lost a finger? No, he didn't lose a finger. No, there was a sword in his neck. No, you know what? He was hit with 50 arrows. No, it was 60 arrows. There was an axe in his back. No, there wasn't. We don't talk like that, do we? This is Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, cut to pieces. I don't care how many arrows hit him. One arrow hit him. They entered the house. And it is said that Sayyidah Zahra's rib was broken when the door was squeezed onto her. My brothers and sisters, 3 weeks ago, I was training. I'm a 100 kg man, and I broke my rib. Right now, my rib is broken as I speak to you. I can't breathe properly. I know how much it hurts. I couldn't lay down. I couldn't sleep. With every breath, there was pain. In every movement, there is pain. This was an 18-year-old woman who was pregnant. And the door slams into her and breaks her rib. At that moment, Imam Ali jumped from that side of the house right to them and grabbed him. But you know how they're dozens and they run into the house and they all take their swords out and the swords are on the necks of each person in the room. And they want him. They want him to attack them. So they have an excuse to kill him and just be over and done with. They want that. They're waiting for the opportunity. If Imam Ali was to take his sword, then he wouldn't, because he knows that if he dies on this night, there's no more Islam. There's nothing left. Yani we wouldn't be gathered here. Because of his true aligned worldview with Allah, he knows what's needed of him. And the Prophet warned him, the people are going to turn against you after me. Be patient. Do what you have to do. The Imam knows he has to survive that night. And God forbid, had he reached for his sword, Sayyidah Zahra herself would have stopped him. But she wouldn't, because he wouldn't. Anyone who makes an issue of the courage of Imam Ali is tricking themselves first and others afterwards. It's not about courage. Imam Ali was the most courageous. It blows my mind how he was able to sustain what happened on that night and continue his mission. And he continued his mission. And he spent the next few weeks with his wife, who became sick after what happened to her. He tried to remind the people of the amana of Sayyidah Zahra, because she was a symbol of the Prophet. You know what he would do? Because she wanted to help him even with her broken rib. In the middle of the night, he would carry her. In the middle of the night on horseback, to go around to the houses of the Sahaba and remind them. She's the daughter of Rasulullah, look what happened. No one came. until the final night that Zahra was on this earth. And she made food for her children that night. She could barely stand, but she wanted to act as normal as possible. She made food for her children. Then she dressed them, she fed them, she bathed them. Then she sent them out. She sat down with her husband and told him, Ya Ali, you know why I did that? You know time's coming. I want you to promise me that you're going to do everything that I ask of you now. He said, tell me, what is it? And she says, bury me in the night time. Don't let anyone of those come to know where I am. Hide me. Take care of my children, but especially give attention to Hussein. He's going to go through so much. Wrap me in the kafan, the remains of my father. The remains of the kafan of my father are to be my shroud. Wash my body, and I want you to put me in the grave. And you carry your mission after me. As the Imam's tears strolled down his face. And the Imam is then requested. She asks him to leave her just for some moments alone to speak to Allah. And she speaks to Allah in her final moments. The Imam goes to the masjid. And she breathes her last breath in devotion to God. And when the children return and see that their mother had passed away, they burst into tears. And they run to the mosque and they call their father and say, Father, لَقَدْ مَاتَتْ أُمُّنَا فَاطِمَةٌ. Our mother has died. Imam Ali had a soft spot for the orphans. His whole life was dedicated to orphans. But now he looks at Hassan, Hussein and Zainab as orphans. Now he sits with his own children as orphans. He goes back to the house and washes the body of Zahra alayhi salam. And he wraps her in her shroud. And Hassan and Hussein both hold on to their mother as her body is carried to her grave. Grabbing onto her shoulders, they cry and cry. Tell our grandfather Rasulullah, we have become orphans just like he was an orphan. Goodbye, mother. Imam Ali takes the children away. He asks his blessed companions to take Hassan and Hussein back to the house. Once they all return, it's only Ali and Fatimah. He carries the body in his arms. And he lays Fatima into the ground. My dear Zahra, I will never forget all the moments we shared. Your fragrance stays with me for the rest of my life. Your voice stays with me for the rest of my life, my beloved. He takes the soil into his hands and places it over her blessed body. And he begins to talk to Rasulullah as he buries his wife under the moonlight. Ya Rasulullah, the amana has been returned. I lost you, Ya Ahmad. And now I lose Zahra. And all I am left with for the rest of my life is agony and grief. Goodbye. Wada'an ya Zahra. It is said that the Imam wrote words for his beloved wife in the poem that's attributed to him. He says to her, is there a way in which the duration of life could be prolonged, and by which this death will not change things and cause separation? And even though I surely believe in death as a truth, I remain hopeful of my meeting with you. I see the problems of this life surround me, but all I think of is how I miss the one I truly love. Is there a path I could take to reach my dear one? For every meeting between two loved ones, there is a separation. And everything apart from being separated from you is trivial to me now. And all my yearning for Fatimah after Ahmad is proof that no beloved will last forever. If at a moment life ends, the cries of those who mourn are but little. That is why at night when I sleep on my side in solitude, I do not feel lonely, because the fire within my heart, due to the separation from my beloved, continues to boil. لعنة الله على الظالمين إلى يوم القيامة. إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون.